myself and explained to him what had happened, the district attorney dropped all the charges. God got me out of it, but God changed my heart in the process. And sometimes the Lord comes to us and we see such bleak circumstances around us, 38 years of not being able to walk. It doesn't get much worse than that. And then to say, you know what, I don't have anybody to help me. And Jesus simply speaks the word. Get up, take your bed, and walk. And this man got up and he walked away. Now Jesus did it on the Sabbath day. And I think Jesus did it on the Sabbath day for a very deliberate reason. Jesus wants to see if this man is not only willing to take responsibility for his own spiritual life, and God wants us today to take responsibility for our own spiritual life. Stop passing the buck. Stop blaming somebody else. Get up off of our feet and let's spiritually move forward. And then Jesus wants to see if we are willing to go against the status quo. You see, there was a lot of religion in Jerusalem. That wasn't the problem. There was the temple in Jerusalem. Solomon's beautiful temple that had been rebuilt by Herod the Great. People came from everywhere to Jerusalem to worship. There was a lot of religion in Jerusalem, but Jesus isn't about religion. Jesus hates religion. Religion is about man's works trying to get to God. Relationship is what Jesus has come and done for us freely. And Jesus said, I want you to follow me. I want you to be willing to resist all the temptation to please man, to do what's politically correct, to swim against the stream, to stand out and to be different. And so on the Sabbath day, he's carrying his bed, which is against Jewish tradition. It did not break the law. One of the 10 Commandments is not to keep the Sabbath and to keep it holy. Thou shalt not work. 6 days you are to work, but on the 7th day you're not supposed to work. Work is your customary occupation. Now that has been fulfilled in the New Testament. If you have to work on Sunday, I understand that. And Jesus understands that. The Sabbath in the Old Testament was simply a picture of what Jesus has already done on the cross. You see, it's about resting. And Jesus is our rest. So the only commandment of the 10 Commandments that's not repeated in the New Testament is to keep the Sabbath and to guard the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. That day is a picture of Jesus. It says in Colossians, it says it's not about feast days. It's not about new moons when the Jews would come and worship and give their animal sacrifices. And he says it's not about Sabbaths. He says those things were a shadow. But the body is Jesus Christ. A shadow only represents what is real. And the Sabbath merely represents who Jesus is. And Jesus says it's not about Sabbath days. It's not about rules. It's not about rituals. It's about a relationship with Jesus. And if you have a vital, living relationship with Jesus Christ, you are going to live so differently from the rest of the religious world around you. And this man was asked by Jesus to carry his bed on the Sabbath day, to say, you know what? I'm willing to walk. I'm willing to go against the religious flow of my day. I'll stand up and be counted for Jesus. But what happened when the man was put to the test? Who are you to walk around on the Sabbath carrying this bed? They asked him. He was not willing to put his reputation, his comfort, his status with his family on the line, and he passes the blame. A man who healed me, he's the one. You see, this man is always passing the buck. I don't have anybody to get me whole. Jesus said, I'll take care of that. Now he's saying, well, it's the guy who healed me. It's his fault. That's the reason. So Jesus goes out and finds him again. You see, it's Jesus seeking him. And in our lives, where we realize it or not, Jesus is always taking the initiative in our lives. He's putting those circumstances that'll make us turn to Christ. He's putting that longing and that desire in our heart for the Lord. And Jesus again came seeking this man, and He found him in the temple. At least He found him in the temple thanking God and worshiping God. And so Jesus finds him in the temple. John chapter 5 and verse 14. Afterwards, Jesus found him in the temple. Now the word found means to search and diligently inquire. It's also found in John chapter 9 and verse 35 when Jesus found the blind man who'd been kicked out of the synagogue. You see, Jesus will take the initiative to find you and I where we're at. And He found this blind man in the synagogue. Jesus always takes the first step toward us. Secondly, Jesus reminds him of the cure. Look with me with the text, what it says. He found him and He said, "See." It's a little word for emphasis. I like the old King James. It says, "Behold." It's a word, it's a particle, just a little three-letter word in Greek, but it's filled and packed with meaning. Look here, behold, see. Look, behold, you have been made well. I like the way it's translated there. Have been made well. It's the perfect tense in the Greek. It's a complete healing. It's a supernatural healing, and it has ongoing results. You're not going to get sick again. Everybody that came to that little bubbling pool and got that little bit of mineral salts in their body, it wore off. You'd have to go to that pool repeatedly. And Jesus says, "Look, you have been permanently cured. Look who I am. Understand what I'm able to do for you. I asked you if you wanted to be made well. I asked you to take up your bed on the Sabbath. I'm going to ask one more thing from you. And that is to stop your life of sin." John chapter 5 and verse 14, "See, you have been made well." Three little words, sin no more. Now in the original language, that's a present tense verb, and it's in the imperative or a command mood. It implies about three things. It meant in his former life, before he met Jesus, he had a continuous life of sin. That's just the way he was. He was a sinner. I want to look at you today and tell you, before we meet Jesus, that's all we were. Jesus came to seek sinners. Stop sinning. That's what I was. I've got to come to that realization that I was just a lost sinner. It implies another thing. Stop sinning. It implies that his infirmity was somehow related to his sin. That God was using that illness in his life as a way to reach him. The blind man, it had nothing to do with him, his infirmity, but Jesus tells this guy, stop sinning. So it implies that this is what he was in the past. It implies that God was trying to get his attention. It also implies that he needs a change of direction. Stop sinning. You must have a heart that wants to follow Jesus. You must have a hunger and a thirst and a desire. Do you really want to be made well? If that is your heart of hearts, then come and follow me. Be willing to resist the temptation to fit in with the crowd. Be willing to stand out and to be different. Be willing to make your light evident to other people that it's Jesus Christ that you're living for. That you won't stand for what's politically correct. You won't stand for the status quo. You won't fit into the mold of man-made religion. Now, one more thing, man, crippled fella. Will you turn your life over to Jesus by faith and worship Him? The blind man did. This man went and he reported Jesus to the authorities. He didn't want to lose his status in the synagogue. He didn't want to stand out and be different. The warning for this man, if you don't, if you don't come to me in faith, if you're not willing to take responsibility, if you're not willing to let your light shine, if you don't want to stop your habitual life of sin and admit that you're a sinner and turn the direction of your life and stop that lifestyle and come and follow me, Jesus said something worse is going to happen to you. Now, he doesn't say what that is, but I think by implication, he's talking about his eternal soul. I mean, what can be worse for this guy? 38 years of not being able to walk. I'll tell you what's worse than that. Eternity separated from Jesus. Christ comes to offer us freely His grace. It's unmerited, it's undeserved. He wants us to be willing to resist the temptation to fit in with the crowd. And He wants us to turn to Christ. You see, when you turn to Jesus, you instantly stop sinning. A habitual lifestyle, that is. When you turn to Jesus, you don't have to concentrate about sin anymore. It's thinking about Jesus. The best way to defeat sin is not to think about your sin. The best way to defeat sin is to think about Jesus. And that's what He wanted this man to do, to think about Jesus. Let's close in prayer.